I'm gonna share my screen now. So, hi everyone, my name is Yanchen Wu, and my thesis is called All Illusions. So, as a technology and architecture develop together, I think people tend to do the same thing as magicians. They hide things behind a concealing facade. So, as a result, all we see actually is an illusions. But I think the things they hide are more important than the things things they expose. So that's why instead of hiding, I want to exposing the mechanism behind all those parts. And I think all those parts, people are only, right now people tend to see those illusions, but ignore the truth behind, which I believe is the key to next technology development. And for example, as a normal drawing, we see maybe just several pieces that are just placed at the right angle of to our eyes. So make our belief that we see is the regular picture. And furthermore, like random 3D object can also be just several different pieces. And all those massing are generating from that part according to the law of the visual perspective. And all those parts are the part we don't see, and it could be extended like furthermore. And what I want to expose, including the mechanism, the history, the narrative system, technology, and every related context, is like everything to make a wall to become a wall, and also like make a table to become a table. I want to visualize those parts into a multi-layered complexity. So for example, like when we stand in the regular room, all those parts is the part we don't see. That may including the story of the part, story of a wall, like history, the material behavior, and structure system, and every narratives of that. And about the visualization part, I really looked into those movies. This movie called Inside Out. It's like it visualized a girl's memory into a different part, like different characteristic of the island. And about my thesis miniature program, I really start at just regular corner of a room, and this red line, you can see the room just have a corner of a bed and a table, a laptop, and just and a window. And starting from the people's eyes, generating those perspective lines. And all those parts are the part that we don't see when we're standing inside of the room. And like each different color represents a different part we're generating from a different original pieces. And this is the physical model of that, a photograph of that. This is the side, and this is that window. So all this part is, it can also be extended into the how much I want, and like how much narrative I want to expose of that. And when we occupy in those space space behind, is like a different color represents a different part of that. Like the blue part is generating from the table, which like we're having fun with friends, we're having dinners, we're watching videos, and we play cards. And also the yellow part represents the thing behind the walls, like we're hearing the noisy, like having every noise, like a baby crying, like the loud music and loud news, like the barking dogs. And I got an animation for that. I'm gonna show you. So as you can see, it's like quite starting at the normal room, but all those white part is the part we didn't see when we're standing over there. And the camera becomes moving to the first is the blue part I mentioned before, and all those textures having a hint of what's the part of that you can see when the line up, and you can see there's a poker and the smiling face. And also this part is I mentioned like noisy behind the wall, because we're always having like everything we can hear. So that part is about imagination. Oh, sorry, got it back a little bit. So this part is like the extruding of the window. So this is the window of that room, and I want to use like a mirror and another view of the room to say that when we're looking through this window, like we can imagine what's inside of that part or what's inside of this room. And it keep going. So this part is like generating from that corner of the bed, which we're using this material to represent like we're having dreams, like we having our dreams every day, sleeping and having like massive distracting part of that. Okay, and then go back to this. And then furthermore of that. So after that, and what I'm keep going on right now is like what next step would be like starting at a like larger scale, like the exact normal apartment, and like want to exposing like every pieces of that, because every part actually always having some narratives to ourselves. I want to like using the way I mentioned before, the space behind of that to make this part, to expose like everything behind of that, to make our think like when we stand inside the room, it's not the place that we can only see like those walls and the columns. There are many stories behind of that. Yeah, so that's it. That's all about my thesis right now. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Yan-Chen.
Thank you.
Can you maybe go back to put the picture from the miniature?
Yeah.
Also, maybe I just of note, this might be known to not to Connor, but Gordon, this is the first presentation that the thesis students are doing. We're about 1/3, quarter to 1/3 of the way into their thesis projects. And the students were asked to, it's called miniatures, and the students were all asked to make at least one physical model, or didn't have to be physical, but most did some physical representation of a part of their project. And it's called miniatures because it could be a small version of a large idea. It could be an excerpt from a larger model. It's just meant to get the students to move from the kind of development of the thesis into how they may begin to represent it in some format, different formats of artifacts. And so this review is to kind of present that miniature and their interpretation of that, what was useful for them, and then begin to set up as we move towards midterm. Can you show the photograph of the model, Yan-Chen?
Yeah, sure.
You kind of went over that path. There you go.
So I guess I'll jump in. It's a thesis project, so presumably there's a like a central idea or concept that you're testing or proving, and I mean, when you started your presentation, I was under the impression that it was going to be a exposing hidden construction elements, like, you know, Pompidou Inside Out or something. But it appears to be a means of generating form, it seems. So just a couple of things. Let me try to make each point into a question. One is that there's a single perspective from which the hidden through perspective is extruded and becomes spatial, I guess, or a physical form. That single perspective, you could argue, is just one of hundreds or millions within the space. And so, is there a dynamic element to the result, or will there be a dynamic element to the result, i.e. you move to a different point and what is hidden changes, right? So that's one question. Another maybe related question is, you know, back to the idea of a thesis. What is the intent here? Is the intent to, I mean, you want to expose the hidden, so to you mentioned, but the elements that you are extruding are not exposed. They're extruded perspectively. They become spatial. They become a form, but they're still, from that singular perspective, hidden. So I guess the question here would be, Like, what are you trying to do? Are you, I mean, is it a form generation technique? Is it some, you know, longing for things that we can't see because we're constrained by physical space, walls, you know, windows? And the last point, which is maybe more of a provocation than a question, is that you have a laptop on a table.
Yeah.
And one could argue that the window was the first or early in the development of the domestic environment, was an early sort of, so let's say, means of communication between the private interior of the domestic enclosure and the public outside of the domestic enclosure. Then you have a laptop, right, which one might argue, you know, allows you access to, you know, through internet, allows you access to the outside, but also is, let's say, a contemporary means of invasion of the private space of the domestic enclosure, far more invasive than a window.
As well as.
So maybe to frame this as a question, you know, where does the laptop fit in? You know, sort of a little bit old school in perspective and extrusion when you have this device which potentially could expose through surveillance, various other means, not only the extruded perspective, but so much more about that which is outside of that domestic enclosure.
Yeah. I get it. So it's like, it's my intention is like, I want to argue that because I think people now, they like, when they sit in the room, okay, this is my wall, I got this wall, I got this table. But some people, they don't quite understand what's the mechanism of that. And for the former question about, you said about the Pompidou Center, that is really one of my precedent. And what I really want to like combine those construction part, like the infrastructure part, combining with the part of what I'm doing now, which is like more like the form generating, like visualization. I want to combine those two parts together. I'm trying to combine those two parts together and making like more like intense or massive thing behind all those spaces. Yeah, but my intention is still quite simple. I want to say like what we see is not as simple as we think. It's like they having massive stories behind of that. And I think that part is more important. So I want to expose that part to the people that's seeing this project. Yeah.
How does this form that we see like in these two images speak to that representation of the mechanisms behind things?
Sorry, can you say that again? About
you said that your prerogative was to kind of expose the mechanisms that predefine a table or a wall, and I'm curious about like what exactly about the table of the wall it's exposing, like if it's the placement of it or why it's placed in a certain way or the use of it or its history. But in like when I look at your miniature model, could you just explain like the connection between the geometry in that model and your prerogative?
Yeah. So right now for this miniature model, this one is more like representing the narrative of that. It's like you're having what you do on your table, and it's like for me, and I'm playing games with my friend. So I got like a casino place over there, and you're having dinner and you're watching video. And about those yellow parts, the things behind those walls. So I'm starting to imagine like what I hear every day, because the thing behind of that we didn't see. So, but I always like hearing like you got the neighbor who is playing loud music, you got neighbor having the loud news, you got neighbor having the barking dog, crying babies, those parts. So using this narrative like to generating those space behind those yellow parts. And like the window is like using the mirror, because when we use this through this window, you just only see one small part of this room. But I want to say, like, when you see that, you can starting to imagine what's the rest of the space you don't see. So using the mirror and like the put another perspective of this room into the facade of those parts. Yeah, I quite like that about this one.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, I think it's difficult for me to square what you were saying with this object. Even after hearing, I was kind of looking forward to hearing you explain it in more detail, this image, because I think whatever comes out of this review today, like this is our starting point now going forward, this model in my mind. So we need to take it apart. But the text, I'm not sure if it's a good fit, because when you were reading it before I saw this object, I was imagining this project of total diversity of stuff and perspectives, and also like Gordon was saying, like, you know, maybe building technologies or other kinds of things that would be layered into a building that you want to somehow expose. But really, it seems like what you're more interested in doing is in creating a kind of perspective formal machine that's more like a unification. It seems like it's not. It's like you want to pack. It creates little compartments in it, and you want to pack it full of different little worlds. That's how I read this thing. And I would take that really seriously. Like, I think you might start to mess yourself up if you work the next month during July and you keep trying to turn your project into a visual aid of what you wrote. I wouldn't do that. I would say, like, maybe just forget for a second what you wrote and just look at this object, try to figure out exactly what it is that gets you so excited. And like, I think it's not by accident that you like all the little knickknack stuff in here, like the porta potties and the dump trucks and the dogs and all this stuff. And I think the idea of like a rack or a compartment object that's just total, it's all compartments. No circulation, it's like compartments. It's very weird. But like that idea of then inserting these little worlds, like it's a collection of different types of environments, maybe is a clearer, and I'm not even sure what that is yet. That hasn't, what I just described, it hasn't risen to the level of a thesis yet, but it is a description of what we're looking at. And I think that's so important to just take it apart and take it at face value at this point. So just, you know what I mean? And, and so don't be afraid to move forward with, here's what I want to say. I think you have to choose, like either follow more religiously what you wrote or do this. And in my experience working with thesis students, do this.
Okay.
This is what you have today, and like work on this and figure out what it is that you love about this.
Okay.
But it is a kind of a weird unity with compartments. So that's something.
Right.
Okay.
I think
Yep.
sort of jumping off of Tom's point, I think it is, I think for most of us, I think what you wrote and what you've sort of produced are not in the same like realm conceptually. I think I guess like my sort of push for you would be to sort of run more with this idea of narrative, because it's very clear that that's a big part of what you're working on right now. And you know, what you've produced is sort of, it's coming from a singular perspective or perspectival point. I guess my provocation to you would be to like consider what happens when you know, I guess if you're starting from one room, what happens when two of these rooms that have a single perspective are sort of adjacent? How does that start to sort of produce like an entire building? You know, is like one of these structures, would it just become a sort of like amalgamation of these like jutting out forms? Or how can you sort of maybe even make the forms even more dynamic and sort of build up on that, and looking at like 2-point perspective drawings? Like how does that sort of, or how could that sort of help you flush out what it is you're working on here? Because I understand what you're talking about when you say everything's an illusion and you're trying to expose what's hidden, but I don't think the exposure you're talking about is about mechanical and construction systems. I think it's about you know, sort of like a form of like self-expression, right? So you're trying to expose the way people are living and moving about their spaces onto the street, right? And you're using sort of the furniture arrangements and things like that to sort of create those sort of cones, right? And I think you have something here. I do think what you're writing, your thesis statement, is sort of holding you back. So I agree. I think you should definitely keep going with this. I like the like fun poppy sort of aesthetic you have going, and I think you could definitely push it a little further.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Yeah. Awesome.
I mean,
oh, yep. Nope. Last comment, Gordon.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could see the like running with this and producing a thesis, and I can see what the other critics are stating as like a not necessarily in correspondence with the with the original narrative. There is relation to the original narrative, but it's not a total, and this is very focused. So on one hand, if you were to run with this and let's say de-emphasize the bigger picture of your narrative, you know, what I see is you know, these kind of rhomboid or parallel piped, whatever the geometry might description of these, you know, sort of square cones is, and as Tom pointed out, there's no circulation, and they sort of nest among, like, adjacent to one another because they're derived from a single point, and you could develop that into a project, and that becomes a thesis. Another alternative might be to hold with your statement and allow this just to be a somewhat abstract exercise, one among many, which would mean in the next 2 weeks or a month you're doing parallel exercises, not driving space as cones in perspective through windows or around tables, but do something else and come up with another one of these, and then do something else and come up with another one of these, and then look at what, you know, wall construction and come up with another one of these, you know, and just develop a library of responses to, you know, the larger narrative that, you know, you presented. And then, I don't know, time permitting, but then, you know, make sense of all of these outcomes, interpretations that could be very specific and each only dealing with one aspect of your narrative or dealing with it in a very focused way, and then try to devise a means of making sense of it all and putting it into a project. But I think in the end, I mean, if that is, I know we got to move on, I'm sorry, but if that is your thesis, to expose what is hidden, and then, you know, it's, yeah, I guess coming back, it's not, this is not in correspondence fully with that with that statement, and needs to be broadened.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Yan-Chen, for going first. That's always a tough
Everyone.
position. Yes. Okay, Tyan, you're up.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So hi everyone, my name is Tyan and my thesis is pseudo-sunyata. So sunyata is a Buddhist concept meaning voidness or emptiness. Pseudo-sunyata represents something that is neither really empty nor really full. It looks for the coexistence between the two. In order to achieve pseudo-sunyata, a sense of equalness must be established in all three categories. First, image making, and then second, architectural meaning, and third, living philosophy. And then for this representation, I will focus on the architectural meaning of equalness. By transpositioning the term equalness into architectural word, tension between exterior and interior must be considered. Equalness means that there are same amount of exterior and interior space within a city. Here are some initial observations in the city I'm interested in. Local people's obsession with balcony. Balcony is an interior space that is trying to be exterior, and then invasion to the outside world. The extreme expansion of balcony would make it a total exterior space that only seems to be interior. And then here are the diagrams. When looking at the section of the city, the interior space is represented by the skyscraper and the exterior space is represented by ground. Here we can see the existing situation between skyscraper and ground is very isolated. While the proposing situation is more intersecting by multiplying the grounds and lifting it up in order to equalize the exterior and interior. So here is an axonometric drawing of the site, Central Yu Peninsula, Chongqing. The terrain of the site is quite dramatic, with a steep mountain sitting above Yangtze River. Here, each terrain lines can be considered as individual ground, which make this image a drawing of many grounds. This is an abstract model of the site showing how the city is sitting on top of the hill. And then here's a facade view. And then here's another orthogonal view. And then I'll show a draft render of the city. That's it, thank you.
Hey, Tian, just a question. Would you be able to just kind of give us a summary of like how you got from those first principles that you laid out to the city? Because I feel like I kind of missed something. It suddenly was there, and I was like, I didn't know what happened. Just in a couple of sentences, just kind of how you got from like almost like the very first page where you were talking about your
this one?
Yes, the Sunyata, and then how you get to the city.
Okay. So Sunyata is Buddhist concept meaning emptiness. So pseudo kind of fake emptiness, and then it's like a state in between emptiness and fullness. And then in order to achieve this, I have to distribute it into three major aspects. So the first one would be image making, and then the second one would be architecture meaning, and then the third one would be a living philosophy. It might seem kind of lost because this representation is only focused on architectural meaning only, but when I kind of insert the concept of equalness in all three categories, and then the the city would, in a sense, show some traits of pseudo-senyata, because if say I don't have equalness, say if I only have one single big object in here, like in this image, and then it's not gonna occupying the full image because it's gonna have emptiness on the side, but only have the center. But if it's equals everywhere, so by like kind of like copy and paste everywhere, and then in terms of image making, the image now is kind of full. So it seems, but however, because everything is the same, and then it almost seems like nothing is being highlighted. So basically nothing is there. So it's kind of empty and it's kind of full. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. So the city,
too.
the city as an image then should give us the feeling of not being full nor empty.
Yeah, that is correct.
As an image. Okay. Maybe go back to the city again, just so I can kind of. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just trying to connect everything here. Like grounds. Okay. All right. Well, I don't know. I think, I mean, this city is very weird, and I guess I'm not going to try to sit here and hold you to some kind of direct representation to very, very kind of ethereal concepts. I think it's very difficult to set up a problem for yourself that's defined by not being something and also not being something else, because then my first question is, well, what is it? You know, I think that's a difficult problem to solve. I get what you're after. I just think it's going to be difficult to kind of point at something and say, yes, that's it. Because this thing is pretty dense, yes, but I wouldn't argue that it's empty, almost empty. It feels almost full to me when I look at it. So, and I don't, again, I maybe just being too, maybe I'm being too literal, and there were other steps in between that became more relevant for you in your work. But like, you know, kind of like in the last project, I guess I want to vote for the kind of authenticity of the work over maybe some of the words that are applied to it. I see a lot of jargon in thesis, and I always kind of want to like clean it up a little bit or just get rid of it, because I find that it's actually confusing, and it puts you into something that sounds like you're talking. It sounds like language should override what we're looking at, but I just don't see that. I think there's a lot more going on than that. And this, you know, it's super dense. I'm also wondering, looking at it, what the scale is, because that's not immediately clear. I'm seeing extrusions, but are those the size of buildings or the size of columns? You know, it's not clear, but it would be, it's kind of intriguing that you're giving no signs of scale. I guess I'm seeing maybe a railing somewhere, a little handrail, but I would take that off. I don't know what that is, but the scalelessness of it makes it feel like you're in a cloud of stuff, and it's a pretty powerful image. Particularly the model about 2 shots back, I thought was pretty. I think that was a model. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. But this is then, you know, just to read your own caption, multiple grounds, extrusions, and an incredibly steep, the idea of cities on an incredibly steep incline is an awesome idea. And that could easily just take over all of the other jargon. And like, this page is your thesis, which, you know, again, I'm gonna vote for that probably on most people's projects, but I think this is very powerful and very beautiful. And I like the idea. Imagine human civilization that's not built not always next to rivers or in flatlands, but like, let's say we started to adhere to sides of mountains, and that the earth would look different today based on that kind of weird premise, which I like. So
Thank you, Tom.
I have a quick question, just in terms of your process, so these extrusions you have, where did those sort of forms come from? You know, because I'm trying to understand sort of how you've like gone from the words to this point, and also like what you're envisioning the city to sort of be. Is it you know, is it meant to be super like I guess busy or like accessible? Because I think you're talking about equalness, and then you mentioned sort of the same amount of interior space as exterior space, but you haven't really shown any type of interior, any like reference to an interior.
Mhm.
So I'm sort of just wondering where, I guess where that fits, that's fitting in into what you've produced.
So to answer, sorry, what was the first question again?
So the first, I guess, let me rephrase. So the first question is where did the forms for the extrusions
Oh, okay, okay. So the project is basically made of 3 parts. So for the vertical extrusion, those are skyscraper and high rises, and then they are already existed on the site. And then for the kind of, so there are two types of horizontal element. One is kind of I call it bridges, and then they are very skinny, about 8 feet wide, and then they have many function. They only have functional purposes to kind of connect the many grounds with the city, because the mountain is so steep. And then the second horizontal element would be the connector, and then it kind of expand, and then it also kind of shrink, and then it varies in many ways. And then me and Christy, we talk about how the form, where the form comes from a lot actually. And then at the beginning I thought that it really matters, but later on kind of develop into a state that it doesn't matter anymore, because all the horizontal bridges and connector they kind of like goes infinitely, so the form doesn't really play too much part in it. So, and then to answer your second question, sorry, what was the second question again?
So I'm trying to sort of understand what the equalness between interior and exterior you're talking about, because to me it seems like you're almost trying to equalize or sort of make access like
So,
the big, I guess, make everything more accessible on foot, right? Through these like bridges and things like that. But how does that sort of equate to an equalness between the interior and the exterior spaces?
so to answer that question now, so one observation that we're finding out at the beginning is that for mostly every existing city, the skyscraper or high rises, they kind of represent interior, and then the ground represent exterior. And in the existing situation is that the interior is being too much focused on by the architects. Like everybody is building the building, but the immediate outside surrounding atmosphere of it is being ignored. So by multiplying the ground, which is also an exterior space, and then we're shifting the focus from interior to exterior. So in this project, I will focus on exterior more, even though they are equal, because in the existing situation, the interior is already being looked at too much. So by looking at exterior more, I can then balance the interior and exterior. So if you look at kind of this image, the skyscraper is here, and then the verticality, and then it's giving up part of itself to contribute to the. It's giving up part of its interior, and then to turn it into exterior and contribute to the collectivism of the image. So it becomes a public gathering space. It's very, so the skyscraper is acting very altruistic.
I think that's so funny to describe a skyscraper as altruistic, like to give a sort of like positive character trait to a building. I think that you're like I think that was such an interesting question to ask you before, because it seems like all of your words are almost like oppositional to the product of this thing. Like it's so full, and like you talked about architectural meaning at the beginning, but almost like, especially in this animation, which I don't really see in your models or in the other renderings, is like all of these bits of traditional architecture. It seems like I think I saw like a temple in there somewhere, and it almost seems to me that like in one reading of it, the way that the city has just regurgitated all the parts of a city, sort of like takes all of the meaning out of those, at least like initially. Like it kind of vacuums whatever meaning or like importance these things had by just sort of, you know, like throwing them up into the sky, and like you said, creating all these kind of grounds. And I almost sort of wonder then like what you think that would mean to inhabit the city and why that's important. Like how would you, if you asked a citizen of the city where they're from and why that matters, what would their answer be?
I think they might actually, they already call people, local citizens in Chongqing, they already call themselves the mountain people. So living in this kind of city, I guess the first sense that you get is that there are no ground floor. So if you can looking at, so we, Christy and me, we also look at the Kuhaus stock center in Shenzhen, and then they have this kind of span kind of in the middle, and then that's kind of like a major ground floor. But for this, we are breaking up the grounds into everywhere. So very fragile pieces. So if you now look at a skyscraper in this, you enter the building, you know, sometimes from top, sometimes from bottom, sometimes from the middle. There aren't really any, you know, ground level like parking, like where the parking garage would be in a skyscraper. That those terms can be changed, you know, like where the lobby is. And then I think that's what. Did that answer your question?
So for you, like, what does that mean?
Can you elaborate? Sorry.
Like, how does this form of a city change the subjectivity of someone relating to it? Like, how would this alter our understanding of ourselves by being there?
Sorry, Colin, I don't think I'm ready to answer that question.
Yeah, no, like, I think maybe not being ready to answer that question is perfect.
Yeah,
but
that's a great question.
I'll figure it out.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So initially, I was thinking, you know, how is this city, besides its particular formal character, how is it any different than New York, like Manhattan, Hong Kong, Miami for that matter, Sea of Towers, and then also looking at your initial statements, you know, starting with the Buddhist concept of the void, and then the pseudo void, and then equal. And I really think that the, you know, maybe I'm with Tom on this, like the narrative is maybe what needs to be reworked. Because as you answered fielded questions, I started to see that your city is different than as a typology than New York or Hong Kong. What you're interrogating is you know, a single ground plane. You could argue that, you know, some of the large cities have a secondary ground plane where, you know, they have a subway or underground connections between buildings. You can look at like Minneapolis, St. Paul with a harsh climate, and they have an entire second floor as a connector in downtown. It's actually, yeah, by code, they have to provide public space on the second floor. There's, you know, there's some other similar, like Safdie in Singapore, you know, with the 3 towers and the bridge, you know, and other Stephen Hall in Beijing, you know, with the sky connected. So, but what you are advocating is for another, like a different typology of city. And I don't think that it's helping you to talk about like the poetics of equalness or to start with Buddhism. I think that you could be far more clear and pragmatic in that you're saying a couple of significant things. Maybe there's some environmental, climate change, migration to cities narrative, which necessitate, in your view, the creation of this kind of terrain for construction of cities, which typically cities are not constructed in these difficult places, maybe favelas, but those are a story or two high, not skyscrapers. So, you know, there's a larger narrative that you construct as to why you feel that this mountainous terrain is the new city. Perhaps because it's on mountainous terrain, which will make the ground plane difficult to navigate, you create other ground planes, right? Multiple ground planes, which are more or less level that people can navigate, people in wheelchairs or people walking. You're making a strong statement for public space versus private space. All of a sudden, presumably the horizontals are your sidewalks, are your streets, and there's an intersection between the tower, which is typically a private zone or space, and all of a sudden, at multiple points, you have the public entering there. So there's this new negotiation between what is your property, right? So, you know, those are themes that I think are perfectly valid for a thesis statement. And they're very pragmatic and clear, but instead of having your jury spend, you know, half of the presentation trying to understand the link between Buddhism, I think it befits you to just like say what your innovation is and what your intentions are, right? And then lastly, you know, it appears that you had a great time constructing your city, and it appears that you're very talented at throwing around form and strange juxtapositions, which create, you know, very interesting conditions. But I think you could be more surgical clinical somehow in that you're deliberate about these things. Or maybe you are deliberate, but that becomes part of your thesis in sharing, you know, why there's an elliptical hole, why there's, you know, a rotated curtain wall, you know, on the tower. Mm-hmm. And perhaps creating a library of moves to be deliberate and to have some meat to the thesis whereby your innovation, I mean, you know, you have to expose it, you have to uncover it. This is what I'm doing and this is what's driving it, and that's how you're going to be judged with your thesis. So if you've got all this, you know, beautiful, spectacular, interesting formal moves, you got to categorize it, library it, and expose how move A is an outcome of consideration, you know, one.
Yeah. Wow.
Thank you, Gordon. Very helpful.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you.
I just have one quick little thought on that.
Okay.
And just to, I thought that was great, Gordon. To what Connor said a minute ago, I think that's not a minor thing. You've also inserted in these more traditional buildings into the city. The fact that they're not on the ground, but they're somewhere along this extrusion off the ground. And I could imagine that's a really interesting angle to this project, and that you take that on in a much more strong way. So it isn't just like a side idea that, oh yeah, and there's also one of these, but more like, what are you doing with the difference between this sort of international style extrusion and these other more like, object buildings with more clear cultural history, and how could they relate, and how could those be more present in the project? It could be a really cool angle.
Thank you, Tom.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go to Henry, and I can assure you that it's something completely different. Be prepared for. I think we've got a lot of a range today, but this one is definitely a jump. So here we go, Henry.
Actually, Christy, you just stole my intro. I was about to say, and now for something completely different.
Oh man, sorry.
But it's all good. No, I'm just kidding. So hi, I'm Henry, and you can see my screen, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm Henry, and my thesis is called The Breadist Manifesto. And in sort of one sentence, I'm exploring formal applications of bread in enabling speculative architectural scenarios. So into my model. So like, why bread? So
hold on one second, Henry. We're seeing your
oh no.
presenter.
Oh, whoops.
We're seeing both at the same. There you go. Perfect.
There we go. Okay, let's do. That's weird. Okay, I thought it should be whatever. I'll just do this. Is that okay? Okay. So like, why bread? So I was thinking like a work of architecture, bread is experienced in section orientation, interior exterior relationships, and material and aesthetics, at least like, when you experience bread.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you one more time. Is it possible to make that full screen, or
yeah,
you can't see your notes?
I don't know why it's like,
the images are really beautiful, and
there we go.
See them
I don't know why.
Larger.
Let's see. Okay. And so what are you seeing now? You're seeing
that's a little better. That now we're just seeing
better.
we're still seeing.
Okay.
That's better if you need to.
This is better. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, a little technical difficulty. I thought
that's even better. That's even better.
Better. Okay. Cool. All right. Okay. So, whoops. Let me get all the way back.
Sorry, I didn't want to throw you off. I just wanted to make sure we were.
It's all good. No, that's really helpful. Okay. So again, so I'll just restart. So like, why bread? So I was thinking the experience of bread, at least in the way you experience it, is sort of similar to the way we read architecture. It's experienced in section, orientation, depending on the bread, sort of the relationship between the crust and like the puffy interior. There's like an aesthetic quality to it. I like bread as a material because it holds cultural and socioeconomic weight. There's a sort of like a universal and understood experience. And so I think that it's so familiar, it's apt for experimentation and destabilization. I like as bread. It's sort of, I was working with the idea of sort of embedding sort of speculative architectural scenarios within bread, almost like a snow globe-like effect. So this idea of like this sort of embedded iconography, sort of like inappropriateness too, of like, you understand, bread as this sort of like puffy interior and having this sort of hard object. So this sort of like textural dissonance. But also the idea of actual bread came from me working through these scenarios and being like, I just wanted to curate the authorship and the viewership of these scenarios using.
What kinds of feedback would you find most useful?
I'm hearing like another voice. Is that something? Okay, never mind. So I was interested in bread because you could carve it, and I was working sort of in 2D with sort of not physical, but like redaction and sort of isolating parts. And I was trying to find like a physical way of doing so. And I think bread is interesting because it's like a non-architectural object. What I mean by that is it's like the sort of void or redacted part is not read as part of the sort of speculation. So you have the sort of like speculative work and it's being hidden or sort of like carved by a non-architectural object. And lastly, I liked bread because it's like, it's like each piece of bread is unique. So there's a sort of like wild card entropic act of creation. Like every sort of the insertion of it, depending on the form, is never going to be, you know, perfect. You know, not every bread will be the same. So you get this kind of weirdness when it comes to like the juxtaposition of like a sort of like pre-created like thing, like say a 3D model that's then thrown into something that's physical and different, and you get a little bit of a difference every time. But jumping off on that, so far I've been, at least in the model wise, I've just been like inserting things into bread, like snow globe willy-nilly. And so I'm trying to find a way to like tie the two closer together. So I've been writing a sort of like a fictional manifesto on a sort of like these people, they call themselves breadists, who are obsessed with bread, and they're waging this sort of holy war against celiacs because, you know, they're gluten intolerant. And so I was sort of working towards this like fictional narrative as a framework for formal moves. So allowing me to think more in terms of like what a people who are obsessed with bread, the way they would think and how that would inform the sort of speculation rather than the other way around. And so there's sort of playing on things like bread as religious allegory, like the Eucharist, or the idea of like post-Fordist mass production of like things like Wonder Bread, which are so like ubiquitous, and how that could maybe, you know, how that relates to also, you know, like, you know, I could go on, I'll digress, but like suburbia and things like that. And so I'm trying to find a way of like codifying the rules and reasons for creation. So I'm trying to create emergent programs based on the restrictions and possibilities enabled by breadist philosophy. Previously in my model, I had just been throwing stuff, creating stuff and then slamming it into bread. Whereas now I want to think maybe like, well, like say like there was this like people who are obsessed with bread, what kind of programs would, they have a deep fundamental understanding of bread down to like the material, and what that could enable architecturally speaking from their point of view. So it's both an enabling and a restriction. And also it gives me a sort of framework for like what kind of programs I could potentially work with.
You're good. You
oh yeah, I'm almost done. This is my last slide.
Great.
So, and so just finally, I want to, you know, I want to pull more into the cultural and political aspects of bread, and I'm trying to tie into or imbue it into architecture. So like the fact that bread is considered a staple food, you know, for maintaining the public order. You know, you have, you know, a Marie Antoinette, allegedly speaking, who, you know, that one thing set off a revolution. So the idea of like, you know, this architectural we think of as, you know, foundational, but bread too, or at least food, staple food, you know, it's written into the Magna Carta. And also I want to work because it is a food and it has material changes that, you know, there could be chemical or material metamorphoses to produce new experiences, like Gordon Matakark's fried photographs. So I'm thinking like, what does like panko encrusted deep fried modernism look like? Those are questions that I'd like to, you know, explore. So yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I would say yes, but you know, or maybe, but I think in order to really respond, maybe you could speculate on, you know, rosemary sourdough and a building. Like what are we talking about? Like specifically, just to speculate at this point.
Yeah, there's sort of, I think I'm sort of trying to like, there's like the dictionary definition of bread, and then there's like bread adjacent, and then there's the different kinds of bread and sort of their cultural weight. You know, not just like bread as like in types of bread, like you mentioned, like sourdough or brioche, but the fact that there are regional aspects of, you know, certain breads culturally, like challah bread and, you know, like Japanese, like Japanese milk bread and what that might entail.
But we got you, but now speculate on what that means moving forward for you. So you've sort of set the, more or less set the groundwork, you know, the basis, but the, you know, the delivering is to now make something, right? I guess, or invent something. And so I'm not doubting that that can happen, you know, so I say yes, but the maybe comes from, I'm not, like, there's not enough conveyed where I can start to visualize what it is that you mean. So what I'm asking is, can you speculate on what it means? Like, what does it become? As an example, even a dumb example, even a simplistic example, what could it be?
Right. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Henry, I think I definitely agree that you're onto something here. I think what might help you sort of figure out how to produce like an architecture from this is maybe create like a catalog of certain bread-like characteristics that you can translate or sort of tie to architecture, either formally, you know, through diagrams. Maybe it's more of like a spatial arrangement type of thing, like maybe also taking into consideration how, you know, bread is actually made. Like, I know you were talking about how every bread is sort of different. There's this idea of entropy that as it's being like made, it isn't sort of replicable. And I like that idea. I feel like you could sort of run with that, where you start with the same set of principles or forms, and, you know, sort of iteratively run through it, and you know, what you come up with at the end, or sort of push yourself to produce different things starting from the same like list of ingredients, right? Mm-hmm. So and, you know, maybe you sort of tweak that balance in terms of, you know, what those ingredients are and what the measurements are, you know, sort of getting I don't know, maybe start to think more like a pastry chef, like in terms of producing architecture, right? Just to sort of set up a working method for yourself. I think you have the narrative, like, incredible. Like, I think the narrative is great, and the sort of manifesto is like awesome and kind of like funny. But I would sort of recommend that you try to bring it back to architecture in a more sort of tangible and visual way, that it doesn't become this like kitschy type of thing, you know, like, I mean, it could have that aspect, but I feel like if you were able to sort of produce like a type of architecture that was, I don't want to use the word serious, but like, you know, something like that, and less like this animation that you have where it's like a loaf of bread with a building sort of stuck on the inside. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I really like that. I mean, actually, you know, bread itself has sort of limited parameters as well, you know, like dough hydration and things like that. So there's a great, you know, potential of tying that into like a sort of more, say, like academic reading of it. Yeah, definitely.
Like a forensic baker.
Forensic.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, sort of look at things you like, or sort of techniques that you like in architecture, and bring those to sort of bread world, right? And sort of create a catalog for you to sort of start to work on this. And maybe this isn't done in I mean, you could do it digitally, but maybe this is done through like a series of bread models, like, or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think you
Kind
can
of
go
a,
either way with it.
I think that's like such a good question. And when I look at this image, it's like the dumbest observation, but it just seems like if you're looking for an architectural in to this problem, like you seem interested in Poche based on these two images that you're describing here. But I almost like, I kind of would love to see you like really lean into the political part as well, because like, I don't know, there's a good timidity, right? Like, you leave a lot of open space for like, what if it's a different kind of bread? And I mean, like, what if it's a quinoa, or what if it's a rice? You know, it could be any staple. But thought it was really interesting and provocational when you connected it to like the suburbs or something. Like, this could be Wonder Bread. This could be like white bread. You know, you could like not attack, I don't know. You could like make a really provocative statement about something specific through this bread. Like, for me, the most resonant statement was like with Marie Antoinette at the end, which is like actually, and was not like the one thing that caused the French Revolution, but was still like a very significant way that we digest the French Revolution historically speaking, and also the way that we castigate Marie Antoinette as a character in that narrative. And so, I don't know, maybe like if you could somehow interweave these things, I think it could just be such an interesting takedown of something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I'd like to explore further.
So maybe running with Natu, your statement on the methodology moving forward with the ingredients as an example, and drawing parallels between, you know, what is architectural ingredients versus you know, the ingredients of bread, and construct or devise a means of assembling the ingredients such that some of the character of the bread is exhibited in the architecture, such as the uniqueness of each what would be building, or the unpredictability of the textures. You know, somehow constructing a parallel, and that could be good, and very like clear and practical as an approach. Another might be, you know, what sort of running with Connor, who identifies this poche, and so you have the cathedral as a typology. You have the bread as, or let's say the loaf of bread as even as like a found object, and then the difference as this poche, and exploring the appropriated or found object plus the architectural typology, maybe interior typologies, and their difference, and running through like a number of iterations and establish a methodology, a different methodology for the production of architecture, you know, as a thesis.
Absolutely.
All of your images are also very fresh bread and bread rots. I think there's an artist that made a lot of sculptures of like cities out of some sort of bread, and then they would rot in the art gallery. Maybe that's like a worthwhile reference to pick up.
Yeah, decay is something I definitely looked into. It's sort of funny. I was a little bit, like you said, afraid of it. I just on a physical aspect, I baked these so hard that they wouldn't rot, or at least they would, you know, resist rot. But like, yeah, I think decay is sort of, I think for me, I'll look into. It's sort of difficult because it's sort of like a natural kind of process. There could be a way of, you know, in terms of like actually trying to control it and guide it. I'll look into it. But yeah, that's
maybe the impossibility to control it is what's important about that.
Yeah,
like, you don't have to necessarily control that aspect.
That's a good point.
I would just, I like all these comments. I agree with you, Connor. I think that this project probably, while I think it is, we have to remember this is an architectural thesis and it needs to, I think I personally believe that the architectural thesis is definitively not an art project. And I think that's just something I would give some thought to. Where do you see the dividing line between those disciplines? But I agree with you, Connor, that I think this is the kind of project where I think we get off target very quickly of where you clearly want to go. You're so excited about the kind of political implications and all that, and I would say go all in. And like I want to see it down to that little thin cracker on the right too. Like what is that? A little city and a cracker. I mean, there's just probably all kinds of amazing ways to go at it. But I would say one thing though that I think regardless of sort of how you position it, I think you really need to be responsible to position yourself in the field and with, like, let's say, you know, we used to do this exercise, friends and enemies. I don't know if anybody does that anymore, but like, who are your friends who are practicing now? What are they doing? What do you have in common with them? Because this is a kind of a form of critical project, which, you know, it is a little bit, you're starting to see that around a little bit just the last couple of years. I would argue following about 5 years of people attempting to bring back a kind of straight postmodernism. And obviously the political angle too, I think is something that's maybe going to be more relevant the next couple of years. But I just think it's so important that you own the territory, not just the project, and that you really, you talk about the really larger ideals of it, rather than just saying like, I'm a Bredis and this is a one-off project and I don't know, what do you think? Isn't it cool? More like, no, this is part of a whole movement and I'm in this tribe and these are my values. You know, I think that would be really important to do.
That's really important. Yeah.
That's a great comment.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Henry.
Thanks again.
Irvin, you ready?
Yes. Do you guys all hear me?
I do, yes.
Okay, cool. Just make sure.
And if anyone needs a break, let me know, but I thought maybe we could take a 5-minute break after my 5 students, and then we'll do Tom's 4 students. But if you need one before then, just let me know.
So hey guys, my name is Irvin, and my thesis is called Zealots of Compton. Thesis is sort of focused on orientation and density through, I'd say, several like supplementary additions. And I'm introducing this sort of terminology, which is a zealot. So space is sort of like perceived through the accumulation of objects. It's self-referential and it's quantified through the X, Y, and Z planes. These planes, in my eyes, are infinite as the space they define. So when space is divided by site limitations, size requirements, or context, these planes are confined to what we call the bounding box. The practice of architecture views the bounding box as the limiter and becomes the initial mass instead of a field in which forms could construct space. To construct space within the bounding box is to create with the box in mind, converting it into a space rather than an object, and to choose when the collection can smash along the faces, set inward, or even surpass the given bounding box. And with that sort of introduction, it sort of segues into the miniature exercise and figuring out how that looks like within a sort of general bounding box. And so with that being said, I also want to introduce or define clearly what this zealot is. It's a form made to highlight this condition. For a zealot to construct space, it is to convert space into a realm for multiple objects, or in this case, multiple buildings. The forms that dance in the box, they don't believe in fragmentation nor continuity, but in moments of activity and moments of rest, which is essentially, I'm saying that it's the opposite of the examples I'm showing you right now on the right, where the box itself is taken as the object, and there's sort of these indentions. So my thesis considers the bounding box as the starting point of design when developing the architectural conditions of a given space. So with this miniature exercise that we worked on, this given space is sort of abstracted for the miniature, and I'm saying that it's this box which I made it very prominent or clear for you to look at with a resin, and the zealot sort of working inside this space, or several of these objects being smashed along the face, trying to leave certain points in the drawing at the bottom. They do sort of surpass it. It's not really about surpassing the box or the aesthetic of something smashing along the box, but really about working within this parameter through orientation, size, or scale, and over time, how many objects would you add to this box? So with this box, or if we want to take this into what the architecture could be, the given space, what are the implications the bounding box has in the architectural practice of all scales? The home, the road, the city, the society we live in is built around parcel restrictions, old city codes, and systemic oppression through zoning practices. But this is changing, I'm saying. And to be more specific, I'm saying that it's changing in Compton. So with the examples on the right, I could really get into this, but these are just brief examples of certain types of bounding boxes or limitations that we all have grown to be aware of in society and the parcels that architects decide to build in, with redlining and sort of understanding how much you can build within a box, and those sort of things. So Compton's bounding boxes, like I said, they're being built upon, corrected, and this gives the opportunity for the zealot to assist in Compton's long-term development. A zealot is not a singular act like the buildings that I'm saying I'm against. It's a series of upgrades, as I would call it, that develop with its evolving boundaries. So going back to that miniature, I'm sort of looking, originally it was a sort of vertical thing, and you could see the zealot sort of working within the box, multiple objects going through. And bless you. And so I to continue the exercise, I've laid it flat, maybe read as a plan or an elevation, and just seeing some of these conditions that are made, where you have these faceted forms, but once they hit the face, you just get this like hard silhouette. This results in forms that are phonetically uncompromising in their pursuit of the construction of space, rather than deeming space as one singular object. The zealot is the catalyst, and I'm essentially saying that Compton is its activator. So I'm taking away the word site and saying that these bounding boxes are simply just activators for the zealots to work in. So the thesis is going to work at 2 different scales specifically, just so we have an understanding of how that would look like for a larger bounding box, or one that's more narrow next to the neighborhood, like the civic or community scale. But for the sake of this presentation, I'll just be showing you the first activator, which is the barbershop, which has interest to me as not only for sort of in this painting, actually by sort of Carrie James Marshall, the Styles, 1993. It's it kind of encompasses what the barbershop typically has. The sort of stuff, the sort of idea that there's a background, the community aspect to a barbershop. These are all things that I wanted to have the zealot basically communicate with or work with. So on your right, you're looking at the site, and at three different moments. It originally was a church slash like a shop, essentially. So these 2 programs never really talked to each other. But around in 2014, it became, on the back end, a barbershop, and on the front end, a salon, or not a salon, but a hair store. which already the existing bounding box was already a limiter, because the existing bounding box was made for expansive parking to sort of work for the church, and it was also limited by the original height limit of that area in downtown Compton. So as a zealot, we work incrementally, right? So instead of just putting down an object that says at the box, these zealots are sort of working in a way that develops with the site. So I'm connecting the store and the barbershop together as my first move for the zealot. And as the bounding box increases due to the height increase that the neighborhood now has, which by the way is 75 feet, there is another addition sort of added that takes the same theme of the hair salon, of the hair store and the barbershop, and adds in a salon / sort of beauty school. And this is another view from the street. No?
This is
Yeah,
wonderful, but we want to leave time for conversation.
Okay, sorry. And so, yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up. So essentially that these are additions added into the bounding box, and sort of working with the spaces that aren't necessarily where zealots are added. When I said activity and rest, and essentially looking at the rest as places for circulation, outdoor spaces, etc. And understanding that the zealot is not necessarily trying to fill the box. It's not its main motive. It's all about orientation. So I'm just giving a brief view of what it would look like within, a few decades, instead of filling the box completely. And it's essentially along the other faces, it smashes along, but on the top face, it actually has no defined edge yet, allowing for possibly more zealots to be added in the future. So with that being said, the thesis has sort of inspired me to sort of push it at different scales as well. So not just like for amassing, but also internally. So going back to the sort of elevations of the project, looking into how these sort of cutouts that I'm showing, or the as you'd say, where it smashes along the face, that sort of creates itself a sort of silhouette, and understanding how that can also be done in the interior. And so these are instances of like the barbershop, and where the zealot essentially touches or sort of hooks onto the original barbershop. Thank you.
So I guess my first question is, where are you pulling, I guess, the forms from for the zealot? Like, is it all coming from your own sketches, or are you sort of, is there a type of like system you've set up to create those forms?
Yeah, that's a good question. I made the decision to sort of distance the forms and the thesis as two different things. So essentially, you could essentially do this idea or have this sort of concept for the zealot, and the forms might not necessarily be as faceted. They could be more circular. So they're really just derivative from my sketchbook, and understanding like when you're orienting these objects, basically how would you do that, and what are the and basically taking into account the existing limiters and the progressing ones that before they're added each time. So it's not really essential. It's not really about the forms themselves, with the exception of the fact that they do choose when they can smash along the face. So in certain elevations, you were able to see a more flatter side, and the others, they're more faceted. So I think that's the more consistent thing about the thesis, is that in terms of formal qualities, that's when you kind of notice it, is when it's actually those moments of activity actually work a lot, and then when they're not, they sort of hit the face, and that's the moment of rest.
I think your models are so beautiful, especially this one. And something about the incorporation of like the text. Yeah, like I just find these really evocative, and the way that the text comes in, and this one produces a kind of like insinuation of seriality, that there's multiple of these and that they could be any sort of combination of things, is just like, I find it very moving somehow. I sort of wonder then, when it reaches that site, like there's a very specific, I mean, it sounds stupid to say specific specificity, but there is like, you seem very interested then in what the programmatic meaning of that site is, from the beauty salon and the church and stuff like that, and what that would mean in Compton. And I sort of feel like, just formally speaking, you don't really like what's it called? You know, the aggregate of those models, the cast that you got these objects surrounded in that represents that box, doesn't really come through. Like, to me here, you know, if you took away all of the sort of translucency and muddiness, and especially if you go back in this sketch you have of these sort of running elevations, maybe further, it's like an actual hand drawing sketch, and I see some photos montaged into it.
Oh, I think that was towards the beginning.
Oh, earlier. Okay, yeah.
Oh, wait, I just saw it. I'm so sorry that I'm making you jump around. This is...
Maybe one more.
Maybe...
It's the one where you have
going.
the person, you have...
Yeah, you have like a little boy's face in the sketch.
Oh, yes, yes.
And that, to me, just seems... like...
Yeah.
There's like an obvious statement that you're trying to make in this image that is like extremely powerful and very meaningful and very specific and related. And I think that like when it arrives on that site at the end, there is like such a position that wants to be taken about what those things are, and there's like this really powerful ethereality in those models you have. So I'm just really curious what all of this stuff that I'm seeing, like, it's percolating through this, but you haven't really specifically spoken to it. I'm just curious if there is something that you have in there that you want to speak to, that's in this aesthetic that's running through the bottom of this project, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. It's something I've thought about as I work on it. It's not exactly something I think it's like an ongoing thing for me right now, where that underlying thing that sort of moves. I think the way I'm looking at it now, if you look at the drawings on the right, the way that the forms sort of move through the box, and in certain zones, they sort of have these collages. So, and to me, I'm reading that as, oh, I'm working at an actual site, an existing one. So I'm just sort of understanding like what happens when it's captured, when those zealots are captured into that bounding box, and how the zealot can then grow from that. So when you looked at the the barbershop or the hair store, it originally had like a very it was originally like a minutes or more store, and then in 10 years it became this nice like hair store, and it got a new paint job. So I'm just sort of curious, like, when can architecture do that, but through density, through mass? So that's a sort of underlying thing. It's sort of saying that that the prescription of growth isn't necessarily like this this gentrifying like political norm, but it also because essentially those areas are already sort of upgrading or developing. So I think that some assistance or would be really interesting, I think.
Irvin, I would suggest that you try to make a more convincing argument for the connection between the aesthetics of your project. And I think what what Connor is pointing out, which seem to be some social and political undertones in the project, but they're left kind of unexpressed. And I think, I don't know, I personally would really appreciate to have more of an insight into like the making of this image and your selection of Compton, and to understand again, like to connect the aesthetics to that interest. I think when you say they're interchangeable and it could be some other form or this, I wouldn't want to be doing a thesis where I said that. I think that you, I guess my point of view on that is that you can't separate aesthetics from politics. But I just think it would also just, whatever you think about that statement that I just made, I just think it's so important for, rhetorically speaking, to reach out to your audience for your work and bring them inside. And right now, to just be completely honest with you, some of these forms look kind of like Lebbeus Woods. And I just don't think that this is a Lebbeus Woods project. And so I think you need to be, what I would work on if I were you would be to really kind of develop those and be more specific, you know, about what kind of mass are they exactly, and like what is their materiality, and how do you inhabit them, and things that make it more specific to your interests. I just think that would be so helpful. And then one other thing too, this idea of a zealot. I mean, this word, every time you say it, I'm always like, are you sure you mean that word? because it has all of these religious and political implications, many of which are negative, because you see what happens in the world across history when groups of zealots commit to an ideology and then execute that against other groups. And as I guess a zealot could also be positive. It's somebody who's really behind an ideology. But I think in this time of clashing ideologies in the world, and extremism, I just find that word to be very, on best case confusing, worst case problematic. So I'm not sure either. If you could convince me more that it had was related to this form language that you're doing, maybe I could go there. But still, I can't remove the political and even religious implications from the word zealot. And I don't know if you want your thesis to get hijacked by that word, because it very well could.
Tom, I actually have to disagree with you on the use of the word zealot. I think it makes sense. I think, Irvin, you might be shying away from what it is that you're trying to say here. You know, I think now in this time, I feel like I understand why the word might seem a bit problematic, but in saying that, or in sort of looking at how Irvin's project is, he's sort of touching on these ideas that, code is changing and these areas sort of need to be upgraded and developed by the people that live there. I think the word zealot is actually very fitting. You know, a zealot of Compton is somebody, the way I'm understanding it is someone who's from Compton going there, or sort of a fanatic in terms of supporting one's community, right? So Irvin, I think you sort of need to push the way you speak about this and be very specific to make sure that that doesn't happen when you give your presentation. Because I'm like Tom said, like someone's going to hear you say the word zealot and like not understand what it is you're trying to say, and is going to take it to a place that's negative and, extreme, like right now is when, I feel like it's necessary for Black communities to be extreme in their development, in their supporting and upholding of each other. And if that's what this project is about, which I think it's about, you're not saying it clearly or definitively enough. Like you need to say it very,
be more explicit.
That's understood, right? You need to be very explicit with it. And as for the aesthetic, I think you need to dig deeper into why it is you've chosen those colors. why it is you've chosen a site that's the barbershop. Like, speak to those points, you know? Going to the barbershop is a very, like, as a young Black man going to the barbershop, that's a very personal experience. You go, that's your thing. You talk to your barbers, you talk to your homeboys, whoever. Like, that, so you taking that site and picking that site and deciding to amplify it and you know, develop it in terms of mass, it's just amazing. You're like, you're going to that site and sort of elevating it formally, using, you know, mass and volume. It's not just like a touch up to like fix it or make it more presentable. You're like redefining the space that is that sort of practical, that sort of space is occupying, like the program. The barbershop no longer becomes a little storefront. Barbershop becomes yourself if it's going to be a little form that's taking up the majority of the site itself. Another thing I'd like to add is the drawings that you've showed us and the models that you've made, the zealots, those like forms that you're talking about have much more of a dynamic sort of appearance than they do in the model you've produced. Like, I feel like everything you have so much here, you need to just push it. Like, you're being very like polite and not to say that you need to be like impolite, but I feel like you're being like timid and sort of shying away from the conversation when you really need to like take it head on. Otherwise someone else is going to take the conversation from you, right? And that's not like, when you're making a thesis, you're trying to hit a point and you need to make sure the words you use and how you talk about what you've done is like very much like right, like you need to hit the nail on the head to make sure that your jury understands what you're talking about and where you're coming from.
Yeah, right on. That's great crit. I love that. I totally agree with that. I just think I totally agree with that. I think if you can do that, then you're hot on the right track. I still think though it's not just a game of words and putting your position out there. You have to do the position. Number one, most important thing in thesis. But I feel like I want to be, as an audience member to your ideas, I want to understand more the specifics of like how these things came to be, like this blue object. I want to know how they become an instrument of your project and help push it forward. That's really the only point I'm trying to make, is that like I need to understand the whole lineage here for it to resonate. And I think you can do it with what you have, but I think the ownership of the design work is going to be really important. I think it won't be as powerful if you basically make a really solid narrative, and then you leave these things to the imagination of like where they came from and what they are. I think I'd be in your face about it and stand behind the design work that you're doing. It's really important.
Natu, your critique was so beautiful. Like, that was really poetic. And also this project is really poetic. And like, I looked up the etymology of zealot, and it comes from a word which means to emulate. And in some way, like, you are really about emulating the site. And like, that is such a political act. I mean, your Zoom background is a ruined Bank of England. Like, you obviously have very big opinions. So if you can get them to represent through these forms, then like, that's going to be incredible.
It's there. You just got to pull it like to the surface, you know?
Okay, we are super over time. Gordon, I would love to hear your feedback, but this will be the last comment.
I think you had a great start to a project, and I think that the fact that I couldn't get a word in edgewise with the enthusiasm of the critics is a testament to how wonderful and provocative the project is thus far. I think a lot of good points I won't repeat, but I can give from personal experience. I feel like I can relate in my time at SCI-Arc, you know, finishing 25 years ago, where I felt, first of all, a culture shock coming from Canada to Los Angeles with racial and economic divisions, which were very painfully clear as one shock, and then feeling the need to address them in my work, yet worried about access, like allowing other people access to my work and masking that work in more or less generic terms as opposed to being very specific. But I think that 25 years, we've come a long way, and we probably came a long way in the last 3 months after a lot of dormancy for 24 years. But I think now is a time where not only are we, I think, more entitled and comfortable in exposing narratives, but I think everyone is begging us to tell it like it is, because everybody is really asking to be educated from your perspective. So, you have these signs buried in the work that you don't refer to. You have programs that are very distinctive. The barbershop, it's like, African American or Compton culture, the barbershop, like, call it what it is, right? And how that comes out in your work. So you have the potential to really push of something that needs to be spoken about right now, and be loud and proud in pushing that. If you say that the form doesn't matter when there's the specificity of your sketches and your models and your form, say everything but form doesn't matter, right? And then it becomes like the zoning diagram. It becomes like a kind of technical project. It's like, oh, this is a project about incremental growth, and it could be spheres, it could be slabs, it could be crystalline rocks, but that's not what this is about. And, as far as matching program to form, you could put a barbershop in a crystal, you could put a barbershop in a box, you could put a barbershop in a sphere. I mean, I don't know that that's what you're talking about. So anyway, to try to wrap, sorry, I think that there's so much here, and you have to be, if you have an obsession with a particular formal typology, then talk about it. If there's a correlation between the form and the barbershop, talk about it. If your thesis is there is no correlation, talk about it. And don't make it just a zoning project.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Irvin.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I'll definitely take everything that's been said into account for sure, especially when developing into a larger site. Yeah, and I appreciate, Tom, what you said too about some of your concerns. I'll definitely show you how far we can take it. And thank the rest of you guys. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Keep going, man.
Okay, we have one more, and then a small break. We also have Casey Hughes. Hold on, Tom, I'm going to mute you just because the background is coming through. Thanks. We are joined by Casey Hughes. Thank you for joining us, Casey. Casey, along with the rest of our jury here, is also an alum from SCI-Arc, and went on after getting his undergraduate at SCI-Arc, went on to get his master's at the GSD. Casey has his own practice just a couple blocks away from SCI-Arc, Casey Hughes Architects here in Los Angeles, and he's also currently a faculty member at Woodbury University. So thank you for joining us, Casey. We are running a little bit behind. So if you can stick with us a little after 1, you'll get to see most of the second half. The first students have been my students. We have 1 remaining student of mine. And then the final 4 students will be advised by Tom Wiscombe.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Junkai, are you with us?
Oh, yes. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
Can you see it?
We can, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Junkai. I'm interested in housing. It's something between single-family house and a large apartment complex. And I'm interested in housing design and the communal space. And this picture is concept of housing proposed by James Y. The complex rendering method describes the different house placed together. And thinking from the site is located on Jefferson Avenue. It's to the south is a large residential area. And I select area to propose from here and here to extract layer texture. And got 2 black and white pictures. And on this basis, the new grid is added to specify the size of the layers patterns. And I get 6 graphics will set in this new frame. And this the new house need to be defined from 3 dimensions and 6 sides using those acquired graphic to define the shape of the new buildings. And then the animation you see showed the deduction process of this architectural form. They construct new buildings by adding, subtracting, and combining. And then it's overall massing model. And this case is a vertical glass house. It's discussion possibility of the residential development in vertical direction, and build a personal space to self-think and release pressure. Has more independent space. And this project is exhibition in which MVRDV participate so the study the factory. They will start thinking about the future city, discuss how to stimulate their others' lifestyle, which adaptability, communication, and intensiveness. And those 2 images come from a series of advertisement is so that people so different activities in different space, which provides me with a good idea. And in my project, the house can accommodate the size of 3 family members. Each family members have a separated bedroom and also reserve lots of communal space. It's a family 1, and this one is family B, and family C. And finally, is every facade of the building. That's all.
Okay. It looks like it's super interesting. It looks like there's a thesis here. But I have to be perfectly honest that I couldn't follow the the progress through the presentation. So I'm at a little bit of a loss as to what exactly, I saw snippets, but I can't piece together the whole story. So on one hand, I would say you should, in crafting your presentations, you should do so in such a way that even if you weren't to speak, that the slides themselves, through clear, large sort of captions, can allow somebody to read the thesis. And you might say that that's selling short the depth and sophistication of the thesis, but every project needs to be able to be communicated as, you know, a statement, a sentence or two, you know, a paragraph, a book, right? So, and in your presentation, you have the benefit of the images, and yeah, I mean, you should supplement it with the text. But in any case, maybe you could give a summary of the thesis as a, you know, in a couple of simple statements to help me in. I may be alone, but to help me into the project.
You're not, Gordon. I would like that as well.
So
like a summary, beginning to end, like very concise. Just hit the major points. This is what my thesis is about.
okay, my thesis is about the housing, and it's between the single family house and the large apartment complex, and I focus on the housing design and the communal space, and this house can accommodate the size of 3 family members.
Okay.
Yeah, and extract the texture from the site and get a shape, and redefine the new building shape, and by the subtracting and adding and combining.
So you've taken some void spaces from the block, you've extruded those or identified those voids as 3-dimensional occupiable space, and you're putting them together from different places in the block. You're putting them together as one unit?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said that it's a 3-unit house?
It's three families members house.
In that block that we're looking at now?
I think he says it's a 3, like a family of 3 or 3 different families.
The one building living the 3 families.
Okay. Okay.
And then where is that? How does that work with the site? Where does that go in relation to the site?
Oh, sorry. Give us again.
Oh, this building housing 3 families. Where does that go in relation to the site? Like, how does that fit on your site plan?
It's in here.
Goes at the end of that block.
Okay.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, I think this has been a challenge for sure that I think we need to keep working on. I think, Junkai, you can stop me if I'm maybe overstating or oversimplifying, but I think Junkai is sort of looking for what he considers maybe a radical housing move, which would be to say, take the way that we live in single family houses with all the idiosyncratic kind of yard and maybe wasted space, that's in between. And that if you start to think about that as a vertical way of living, that maybe those communal spaces, when structured or designed within a building, could become a lot more than corridors or elevator lobbies, that they could become more like the communal spaces, the kitchens, the dining rooms. You're not quite saying that explicitly yet, Junkai, but I think that that's what you're thinking, that, you know, the bedrooms of these three different families would become, you know, quite small and periphery, and there would be an enlarged, kind of an extreme or radical enlargement of the connective volumes. And that I think that the looking at the kind of the Nolly plan, or the kind of figure ground of the adjacent single family, was a way to sort of say, we already do this. We already waste all this space in between our housing units. How can we make that maybe more productive when we move vertical? And could there be something in between the kind of slab with apartments, or the kind of nuance and idiosyncrasies of a single family home?
I mean, that was helpful. I also I like the kind of extreme thinness of the typology and the kind of weird, almost impossible spaces. Like if you go up this stairway up to the first level and you have to crawl around, it's like, you know, John Malkovich, you know, on the 13.5 floor, whatever. But like, I think the extremes offer, for housing in particular, offer really cool ideas for inhabitation too. Like you literally, that's like a weird loft or a bed, and I don't know. I like the weird extreme differentiation of the typology. But the thing, you know, that's neither here nor there. But the thing the other thing that I thought, and I have no idea if this is an interest of yours, Junkai, but it kind of reminded me for a second about this whole new emerging industry of, you know, of prefab houses that's out there now, and the idea of, you know, there are all kinds of versions now where we, beyond just the container from ships, you know, kind of converted into a you know, sort of a high-end mobile home, whatever, prefab home. Now there are all kinds of other options out there, and yet still they're usually based on a kit of parts of like how they might be assembled. And that's just the way that you're rendering these makes me think that a kit of parts could be really re-examined in terms of like how things kind of slide together or assemble. The parts that you buy, like maybe you buy, you know, 2 or 3 of these, you don't buy all 5, and you assemble them in different ways. And it would be, it's just an interesting angle, because that is an actual super relevant market right now. And I think it's going to be huge in the next 50 years around the world. And to kind of, you know, it gives me, when I think about it that way, it gives it even more relevance than it might have already had, as a kind of formal and spatial study, reaches outside of your work as a designer back into society and a current interest that's out there. So I have no idea if that helps you or anything, but I imagine the different ways of assembling these could create some really amazing, like, indoor-outdoor spaces in an extreme way, unlike any of those other available prefabs.
I think that's a really interesting point, because when I look at the difference between slide 3 and slide 4 with like the Nolly map, I just feel like when I kind of like don't believe your tracing of the site stuff. And I know that because we all make these really arbitrary decisions when we trace those things. Like, are we going to trace the shed, or does like the back patio become something that we take up? And like, you know, when I imagine what that would result in, I almost imagine like a Rachel White-Reed kind of like, it wouldn't just take these pure extrusions, but that you would end up with like an imprint of a stucco or an imprint of like boards or something. So I feel like that's one direction that this kind of exercise would possibly go in. But at the same time, I feel like you kind of just like these formal aspects of those alleyways and stuff. So I almost wonder, like, if you don't need that maneuver of saying that, oh, I literally casted all of these pieces around the area, but more of like the spatial quality of these spaces, not the form, but the space of these alleyways and negative spaces is what's provocative about them. And so therefore, like I can have a very narrow vertical thing and I don't need to justify it because I took it from someone's like side entrance on their yard, but it speaks to that side entrance nonetheless.
Yeah, to follow on that, I agree with a lot of that. I think that one of the issues that I have with the initial tracing is the fact that it doesn't appear to be a real urban context. It appears to be already a modified urban context. So I think one of the first steps would be to actually work with you know, a real site and trace a real site rather than and you'll find that if you're looking for unusual geometry, you can definitely find sites that have that. The most provocative aspect of the thesis to me is the idea of what's between single family and multifamily. Like what would that be? And you know, following on comments, there's a movement obviously about ADUs, accessory dwelling units.
I think you might have froze, Casey, for just a second, or still.
Thing about ADUs, I'm not sure if you can hear me now.
We hear you now. Yep, we froze
fantastic.
just for a moment.
Yeah, so so with ADUs, it's a movement that you know, started in 2017, and basically, I think that you know, for me, that could be a direction of what's something that's between single family and multifamily, right? Because you're taking single family lots and actually making them multifamily. But I guess basically, one of the issues that I have with what's happening here is that it seems like you're using the single family lot typology for a form finding exercise, but then actually taking it away from the constraints of those single family lots. So I wonder if there would be a stronger thesis if rather than taking these building forms and implementing them on a unconstrained site, that you actually use the constraints of the site to sort of justify some of the moves that you're making.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree and sort of in parallel say, you know, Christy, your explanation of the residual spaces that your unused spaces within the single family lot and assembling them for 3 families in a vertical stack in such a way that those spaces equal, I mean, similarly odd, but putting them to work, you know, as a thesis, I think is one thing, but it's a little perverse. Like for when, you know, Tom, you talk about certain prefabrication. I mean, the form, as interesting as a building that this would be, it's convoluted and inefficient. You could say, well, with current technologies, we can make the most convoluted and complicated thing economically and efficiently, but it probably wouldn't be a starting point, right? I mean, in all likelihood. I mean, but I think the thesis, you know, could be to actually occupy in the like accessory dwelling units, occupy the single family lot, determine which spaces are, let's say, not utilized, use them and make a single family lot into a 3 family space. And as opposed to, you know, what was referred to as transferring somewhat dysfunctional residual spaces and stacking them on an unconstrained lot in a very, like in a highly idiosyncratic construction, which is a little perverse, you know, instead to operate within the constraints of the site and significantly transform the site itself.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a valid concern, Junkai, that I think we should address. I do think that also, we haven't really talked about this, but I do think there's kind of a growing, maybe it's just because we're coming off of like Urbans and thinking of like the code and systems that help shift these things. I think like multifamily mortgages are also in some markets, and I think San Francisco is a big place where that's starting to starting to take hold, where you kind of go in on a 4-unit place, and your mortgages are connected across 4, which allows people that maybe wouldn't have access to a mortgage have different access. I'm still learning about that in a different context, but I wonder if that might be of use here with your interest, Junkai, of this sort of this in-between type of living that's not quite the standard apartment complex, and not the kind of full-on single-family home, but maybe specific to a Los Angeles type of market, which is also almost impossible for anyone to own a single-family home.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. You talk about San Francisco. We're in Los Angeles, which has its own specific non-typology or typology.
Right.
And, I could cite an example in Toronto, again, with these accessory dwelling units, where Toronto has back lanes for typical single-family properties, even deep within the core of the city, and recently has allowed laneway housing. So you could build, where previously there were just garages, now you can actually build another single-family house on the same lot. So, sort of responding to the typology of the city and the need to densify for a number of reasons could, be a super interesting proposition.
Right,
Yeah, to follow on that.
Last comment.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. To follow on that idea, I think that if you looked at the voids that are produced within the city and you look at how those voids are produced, for instance, the voids between buildings or the voids between, let's say, buildings and infrastructural elements or roads and that type of thing, you might find that there's a typology of those voids and that there's a geometry that's also connected to those things. So that, like an analysis of those, negative spaces actually could help you produce a formal language, which it seems like you're striving for here. And, then you could connect the language of the buildings you're producing with the actual infrastructure, or let's say urban elements that produce them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Junkai. I know we're running behind because we started late, but I still think probably everyone needs a 5-minute break to stretch and to do whatever else. Would it be okay to ask everyone to come back in 5 minutes?
Yep.
Okay. Great, thank you. Devin, are you there?
Hi, Christy. Yeah, I was.
Hi. Sorry to call you out. I was just thinking that maybe you were the. Do you have this Zoom at 2 o'clock?
No.
Okay.
Oh, maybe I do. No, I have another one. I just wanted to see how everything was going, but I'm working while I'm doing it, so I didn't.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, no problem. I just was. I mean, we'll finish by 2, but I think we're going to get close to 2 because we started late. So I just didn't want the next group to be concerned, because I think maybe it's not such an issue. Maybe that was only an issue for YouTube. Maybe that was only an issue because there was only 4 YouTube channels. Because
Right.
I think everyone does have their own Zoom link, so maybe it's not an issue. I was thinking that we were sharing that.
Yeah, link. I made a link, so I assume we're that link. Yeah,
that's true. Okay.
Sorry to Zoom. I just I'm like working, and I didn't want it to look like I wasn't paying attention.
No, we're on a 5-minute break anyway. No, we got a late start, so I think things are going well. But it's also 20 minutes is so hard because there's a lot of content by this point.
I know. It'll probably just run over naturally. It sounds like.
Yeah. Well, no, feel free. Great that you're listening and working. No problem with that. I just wanted to for a second, I was thinking that maybe you were wanting to test something for like the 2 o'clock to see if like the YouTube worked or something.
Just been doing a little Zoom bomb, seeing how everything's in the morning. And of course, everyone is welcome in the afternoon to see what's up.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. I'll definitely try to jump in. It's been fun so far.
Yeah.
And can't wait to see everyone at 6 o'clock. It'll be nice to have, even in Zoom form, it's nice to have kind of small celebrations or group things.
I think everyone's doing amazing work. I love that they've been kind of using home in so many different ways.
I know.
Stage sets and kitchens and all kinds of things that will produce different types of models and representations.
Right.
It's really quite remarkable.
I think in my group, in that regard, the most extreme is the making bread as a model medium. Definitely in vogue right now with all of the selling out of yeast and the upsurge of home bakers.
Anyway, I'll leave you to it. So
okay,
no worries. We're on a different link.
Okay, sounds good. See you, Devin.
See ya.
All right, we'll wait for Tom. Tom, are you there?
I am.
Awesome, great. So to our jury, we started about a half hour late. Are you able to stay for these last 4? Or if anyone needs to peel off, we'll understand.
No problem. I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, it works for me.
I may need to head out to get back to DID.
Okay.
Yeah.
Totally understand. Well, when you need to go, we'll miss you, but we understand. Thank you for joining us. Okay. Well, let's see. Our next student here, I think, is it Mei Yi?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah? Awesome. Fantastic. I can't wait to see what you've been working on. Take it away.
Yeah. Okay, I started. Hi everyone, I'm Mandy, and in this era of big flag, architecture as an Asian subject has also become a kind of database. It has the ability of self-generation. We can learn architecture from architecture, and maybe we do it all the time. I start the project from the collection, and finally I choose those 5 projects, which is Remco CCTV building, the Burke Concert Hall, Adorosis, Canal Monument, and the Frank Lloyd Wright Ennis House and the Hollyhock House. And then I draw the silhouette of those buildings and offset it to create graphic patterns. After that, I use the pattern to separate the building, which turns the mass object to the graphic shape. and I scale it, move it, and put them together. This unfamiliarization process tries to blur the gap between the form, shape, and icon. And there is no longer a binary opposition between the mass and the patterns. And thank you. Thank you.
Mandy, do you want to maybe run that one more time so people can think about it while everything's kind of bouncing around?
Yes.
Could you explain your choice of precedent again?
You mean explain the reason?
Yeah, what drove the choices of these 5 buildings?
Actually, all of them, I think all of them have like a strong, strong shape or strong form, strong mass of it. And also they have a very specific patterns in it. I think that is the things that I care more. Yeah.
And are you attempting to use the intelligence of the patterns and the forms to create new architecture, or are you trying to sort of destroy the authority of each of these iconic works by disassociating the patterning and the form and the scale? I mean, what's driving you?
I would say both, actually. Also, I feel like the authority question is interesting, but I think I'm still doing some new architecture. Yeah, I don't think they have like a strong difference. Does that make sense to you?
One more time, so you're somewhat in agreement with both strategies, but you said a kind of third. Could you repeat that?
I know. I think my answer is both of your both of the position. It makes sense for me. Yeah, I think that's my point.
And then being a thesis, by doing this, by selecting these icons and disassociating elements of them, rescaling, and putting together in a particular way or a way that is not particular, maybe either casual or particular. What are we getting at? What do we have now? And what is it?
What do you mean?
Well, did you just, are you inventing a means of producing architecture, and that's your thesis? And if so, what do we get in the end? Is this a new icon, or is it devoid of iconography through the mashup, or like, what are you trying to get at, and what is it?
I think Yes, I want to challenge the authorship about the architecture, and I think finally I will find a way to generate architecture. Yes, and also this is like the street, which means I will put this building together on a district scale rather than a mixed building, rather than a single building. So
okay,
finally,
yeah.
I will design.
Just to sort of give you a sense of where I'm going with it. As a thesis, you know, you want to make these kind of claims. Well, maybe one can argue that a thesis in 2020 doesn't make these kind of claims, but in a classic thesis, you want to, you know, state, you know, very clearly an intention. You know, my project is about destroying and emphasizing the iconography of blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like, what is it that you're trying to do? And again, this is in a classic sense of a thesis, and then you want to say, and in so doing, what I'm producing is a new kind of architecture which liberates, da, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it?
So you mean I should have like a strong position about this question?
Yes, or you could say, I'm redefining what it is to be a thesis, and I don't have a strong position, and you know, which is in itself a thesis, right? But it's like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this, right?
Yeah, to follow up on that, I guess I would ask for your definition of what an icon is, because that word has been said a lot, and I want to understand more why you're using that term icon. The reason I ask that is because it seems like the precedents you're working with, I wouldn't consider them iconic buildings. So there's certainly, you know, the majority of them are well known in the architecture field, but but like in terms of like generally recognizable icons, I would say the only one that might approach that is the CCTV building.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, go ahead, Casey.
I was just going to say, so I think that the definition of what you're referring to when you say icon is really important to the thesis, because you've also mentioned shape and form, and obviously those are a lot more distinctive in these examples than iconography.
I think, yeah, I think these are totally good points, and I think every thesis student needs to answer the question of why, because sometimes the how is easier to do. In a way, you guys are oftentimes so tooled up with so many hows, so much technique from SCI-Arc that sometimes the why is the more difficult part. But that's why we do thesis. I think it's not a minor thing to have a position on what you're picking and why. I think that's huge. However, it's up to every architect to either reveal their sources and their process or hide it. And by starting the presentation the way you did, it made it seem like the jury, you basically pointed us to look for the relationship between these 5 buildings and then the final object. So you know, but you could have done it differently and just showed us that your interest in offsetting and graphic shape, and left it to the audience to figure out what the source material was. I mean, in a way, I think you'd have to almost bring it further though, because some of the source material was pretty obvious still at the end, even after you processed it. But I think if you continue to process it and make it more your own, I think you won't necessarily have that problem. But again, it has everything to do with how you present it. So the way you presented it, there's no way we could not be looking for those sources or those points of origin in the piece that you showed later. Right. So how you present it is really important.
I need to keep something secret.
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying it's really up to you. I mean, not
Yeah,
everybody does that.
I
You can
got
do
it.
it either way. But I'm just saying, if you do it this way, it's much more of a kind of a diagrammatic concept project, and then everyone's going to look for it and see if it resonates. But if you could do it the other way and show first what it looks like and what you do, how you even program or use, or a building made out of silhouettes, like an all silhouette building. It's an amazing idea. But then I want to know more about that, the specifics of those design objects.
Got it.
Yeah, it's up to
Yeah,
you.
I mean, I was sort of outlining a classic approach to the thesis, but you know, thesis is also, you know, a performance. It's many things, but you know, as performance, if you want to conceal, let's say, you know, you could dissect, spend 3/4 of your presentation, you know, in a super rigorous manner, dissecting each of these buildings to its components and putting them together. Or, you know, maybe as Tom suggested, you can show the end result with most of the precedents obscured and tell a completely fabricated narrative as to how you formed the thing, knowing full well that you did it in a different manner, with some intention, not just for the sake of play and performance, but there's a reason behind obscuring the source and telling a different story and shaping a discussion that results. So
I totally agree with that. And I think, like, if we want to get to the source of your design interests and your sensibility, sorry for the drilling in the background, then you need to get right to this point of, like, silhouettes. What is your interest in silhouettes vis-a-vis other contemporary architectures? And why is that? Why are you going for that? Why are you voting for that? You know? And I think you can make a good argument for that.
Well, and to follow up on that with the notion of icon and silhouettes, in terms of, you know, an icon is obviously something that's recognizable, and how far can you abstract an icon and still have it be discernible? And I think that could be an interesting like quandary for you to tackle. So it'd be about, you know, a sense of abstracting either through silhouetting or these other processes that you've used. And, you know, at what point does that icon become so modified that it's no longer discernible?
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think we've been telling a lot of students this morning, because it's just the type of review it is where you're sort of gaining steam, momentum, let's say, that I think maybe being more direct about what your obsessions are and your interests. And so I think, you know, you don't have to, you wouldn't necessarily have to tell us all the reasons that you picked these if you would choose to show them again, but you could maybe just disclose to us that you think maybe architecture, I'm just recalling a little bit from prep, like it needs to be more playful. You think it should have not just a little bit of pattern, but an excessive amount of pattern. That you think things like profile and outline and those things should be more dominant in architecture. I mean, not everyone's going to agree with you, but if that's what you think architecture should put in the world, like, I think you should, like, be explicit about that's why you've kind of outlined these things. And then I think if you're going to go that direction, I would also kind of encourage you to maybe not use shape, form, and mass interchangeably. You know, that I think that there are certain aspects of these things that you were drawn to, and that you drew out of them quite literally by sort of retracing them, outlining them, etc. So I think I would be more explicit there. And then you have put a couple things on the table, but I definitely think the project of the outline or the silhouette, and where that doesn't just become an accoutrement to a project, but that your actual project exists within that profile potentially. So I don't know if it gets so extreme as something like, you know, the St. Louis Arch or, you know, something like that, but that you're actually occupying, the profile gets so thick that you're actually occupying that. And then if that would get overlaid with pattern. But even with your pattern here, it's super fascinating, your examples. Like you could be more explicit there too. Like there's the graphic pattern versus the kind of embossed pattern versus the Cool House, where it's coming from like the functionality of the kind of structural grid and the window openings and stuff. So I think you could start to kind of pull out how pattern is being made and calibrate that more for yourself.
Yeah, I agree.
That was great, Christy. That was really helpful. I totally agree with that direction. I think let's pick and choose through all of the stuff that you made and identify all those points that you made and keep developing it as a design project.
Yeah.
Right on. Cool.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Mandy. Okay, Jack, I believe you are next.
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. Take it away.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so my thesis is a proposal of the new LECMA museum. And this is my miniature model. Based on the model kit that I developed from a precedent museum, I'll compose the parts as proto-architecture to become a museum's prototype that's located in Los Angeles. So why model kits? This is the model kit drawings that I did in Tom's Vertical Studio that semester. And I think I'm really interested in the relationship between model kits and architecture. I think the thing about the architecture model is that they represent things at an order scale. The awareness of the scale changes how we read the architecture. So we see the buildings as parts and types. The reason why I'm designing a museum is I'm especially interested in the type of kits nested in a kit. It's kind of like when you open the architecture, then you see a different scale of architecture inside. So it's like a little world inside a world inside a world. And suddenly all the parts lay out as collection. It's like a curation on different scale inside a kit. And I chose Sir John Soane's museum in London as a target to develop my model kit. The reason why I so much love Soane Museum is because of its types. It's composed of several rooms which are nested in the volumes. The thick walls act as compartments, and in the interior you can see another space inside. Then the scaled collection nested in the rooms. So this is how this miniature came out. I tried to rearrange the scale of the rooms and the collection in different hierarchies. Then I pull out the types to make this Soane Museum model kit. I treat all the parts as proto-architectures. The types originate from the Soane Museum, but they become less recognizable as neoclassicism components. You can see the types of the curation in a museum and the small rooms nested in a huge space, the things nested inside another container, and thick walls with compartments inside. So I think I'm aiming to explore a new type of museum that correspond to the model kitology and also re-understand the architecture from a model kit perspective. Yeah, thank you.
What is the importance of the container that holds all of these kind of parts, like the white that we see here? Is that something that you feel remains in the project constantly, or it's merely just a holder of these pieces and the pieces themselves come out and form something else?
You mean like the compartments here?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's so basically it's a type in the museum is a wall with compartment inside, and I think this type is also similar to the model kit, that like when we open a container and we can see another kit or box inside. I think it's kind of like a program nested inside another program. So I think when it goes to a real scale museum, it's gonna be like a program inside another program.
So you envision this like white thing that holds the pieces as something that will translate through to the final project and therefore become something architectural?
Right, yes.
Yeah, I kind of see this line of questioning because I personally think that the form that's holding the pieces is more interesting than the pieces themselves in this case. And when I think of a model kit, I think of rather than it being something like this, it might be made out of styrofoam or something like that. I often think about an armature, and those armatures, to anybody that's built, kit models, the armatures themselves are prized because they're so beautiful, right? So it's not just the pieces, but it's the armature. And to me, that is, I think that like a deeper investigation of that would probably, be a good way for you to translate this idea of model kit into, or let's say to define what a model kit architecture is.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when you say that you're imagining this to be sort of program nested within program, I mean, if you're redesigning or proposing a new design for LACMA, what are the other sort of nested programs supposed to be?
Well, I haven't done that far, but in my imagination, like when I'm doing research and I look into the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, and I think it's really interesting. Is because it's not only like program inside another program. It's like a different scale inside another scale. So you can see a real scale architecture as a collection and nested in a modern space. So that's been like when I try to reassemble these proto architecture on site. I think these might gonna happen. It's like you can experience the architecture as a prototype in different scales.
Another question for you is, are you imagining this to be sort of the model kit laid flat as you have it on screen, or sort of propped up like your miniature was photographed? Because I think that definitely is going to like change how one would read the project, right?
Yes.
Because then sort of the like vaulting and that ceiling that's happening is going to be read as like a wall rather than a ceiling, and sort of thinking about the spatial relationships when you take sort of sections or like model bits of classical architecture and sort of change how that change their orientation, and how that will affect, I guess, your form making or just the spaces you're creating in general.
I think that's also really interesting, like as a point, because the verticality of it would be something that's so opposite to like the Angelino mentality of constant horizontality, and that would juxtapose with Peter Zumthor's proposal for the site as well. And that almost makes me wonder, like, if you really need such a heavy reliance on the John Soane Museum, which I know it's clear that you adore this building, so like I wouldn't want to rob you of that. But I almost feel like, you know, like a sarcophagus is like maybe not the most necessary cultural reference to like uptake into this project. But like, you know, that section of the John Soane Museum that you have here is really interesting, and like, something that just comes to my mind is like, what if there's already a lot of existing stuff on the LACMA site that you could take up as like a kit of parts. It is itself a kit of parts through the way that they did multiple additions onto it and are now tearing that all down. Or B, like a kind of impression of all of these museums. Like, you know, we could see in here the facade of the British Museum or something, or some other contemporary museum, and like I would just question like this precise kit of parts that you're taking up here.
Yeah, I see the what you're representing here as more of a strategy than like a literal building proposal. So to me, the components themselves that you have, to me, they seem like placeholders more than the actual components. That's the way I'm interpreting this. And so what you're talking about is a strategy of, you know, a way of producing architecture. And for me, you know, the real interest again goes into the packaging, but the way that you're representing the packaging currently is that there's a one-to-one correspondence between the components and the packaging, but that's actually, you know, as we know, that's not the way that packaging occurs, right? So I think that for me, there's a potential of, you know, if the components themselves are, you know, existing objects or appropriated objects, then the design itself is in the packaging, or that, or how the packaging sort of would translate to an architecture, right? So I think a deeper investigation of that would probably give you more to work with in terms of the elements of it that you would be designing.
Yeah, totally.
I've come to expect and almost become numb to, you know, postmodernism 2.0 at Columbia, or maybe we're at postmodernism 10 by now. But well, so for one, you can't escape that discussion, although we're, you know, as Tom alluded to earlier, there's been some kind of resurrection, but you know, and I'll second Casey's point, where even if you know, these elements, these neoclassical elements, are placeholders. Like even if they're not intended at this point to be placeholders, they should be made to be placeholders, and that you shouldn't just relegate the hard work of architecture and designing spaces with specificity to what the spaces are trying to achieve and the experience that you want to communicate. Even if it was done so well in this building, in your opinion, you know, you should be responsible and take charge with inventing that kind of relationship between museum occupant and space and work of art, for example. That is a real architectural thing. Now, so as opposed to directly using these elements, you know, allowing them to be placeholders, defining what elements need to be designed, and taking that challenge of designing those elements, I think is, I would believe, is an important part of, you know, doing this thesis. Now, where I see the why it's not postmodern 2.0 and it's, you know, postmodernism 10 is that, you know, you have brought something to the table, I think, and it's something that is thesis worthy and something that you can continue to exploit, and it relates to, you know, your model kit, and an image like this, and the holder of the parts having an abstract or dissociated relationship to the parts themselves. And that is absolutely thesis worthy. And now, so just once again, if you were to actually design each of the components, determine what the components need to be, and what they're, you know, in a very deliberate way, create relationships between art, people, and space, and then embed those within an abstract block, or maybe it's not an abstract block. Maybe the block, which is just, you know, a rectilinear volume right now, actually starts to become something else, but disassociated from the parts. And that could be mediated by this poche or mediated by something else. You know, it could be mediated by, like if you take a climate strategy, it could be a buffer zone where it's not heated nor air conditioned, but creates an occupiable deep inhabitable layer between the program spaces and the enclosure. And then the enclosure could be, again, you know, this abstract, you know, volume that fills the site, or it could be, you know, the loaf of bread as an example, where it's something other because it's trying to communicate, let's say at the scale of the city, something else, you know, like Frank Gehry's style. You know, he speaks about, you know, the building's body language and how he, you know, deals with context through the exterior form of a building in relation to what's around it, which may be disassociated from or somewhat disassociated from what's taking place in the interior, right? So, you know, I'm sorry to try to, you know, put the pieces that you present into a somewhat conventional project format, but there is innovation here, and you could produce, I think, a significant thesis statement through not being so casual as to take pieces, like, you know, clever, casual, funny, by taking pieces from this neoclassical treasure and redeploying them in Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jack, I would just say there's some really good crit there. I too share a little bit of the uneasiness with all the classical symbolism here as brought into Los Angeles. And I just wonder, I think it would be great to just expand what's in the kit. And I thought Connor's idea was cool. Actually, there were a lot of great ideas just now, but Connor's idea to even recycle the existing buildings from the site and make a kit out of those to make the new building. And I also think that that Natu's thoughts on the verticality of the collection, I think, would be really exciting and interesting, and that idea that could be posed against the horizontality of the Zoom floor and all that. I don't know. I think there's a lot to work on here, but I just also kind of find that the classical stuff is going to be real problematic and pretty hard to design out of the system because it's so embedded in all of your parts. So I don't know. I just think I would just give that some more thought. And but you got this. I think this is going to be really cool. And let's talk later.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, bye, Natu. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, for sure.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Natu.
See you.
Okay. Deepak, you're up next.
Yeah. Where next?
Yeah. So my name is Deepak.
Yeah, I'm Gia. So we
Oh,
present.
you're a team. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You didn't have it listed that way. Cool.
Okay. Yeah.
So just to be clear, this is the last project then.
Yeah, that's true.
Is that true?
So, okay, so we present the Metropolis of Tomorrow version 3 to you all.
Urban designers often do not entirely need new ideas to improve our cities, but crisis do. Pandemic or crisis enforces us to think about remaking the cities where we got the opportunity by our Professor Thompson to continue understanding the principles of Hughes Ferris. And we continued with this project taking over in Los Angeles and imagining the city of tomorrow. It is the moments of certain corners or maybe the buildings that capture what LA is about. While in architecture, we capture moments in buildings and spaces and where we live to help us feel memorable about our lives.
So the project started with studying Hughes Ferris drawings from his book, The Metropolis of Tomorrow. Sketches from his book focus on his imagination of an ideal city in the future with skyscrapers placed well apart from each other, broad avenues, and coherent organizations of building typologies. We use using the architecture model at different scales to represent another understanding of architecture and the world around us. It allows all building components become a set of collection that is a flat ontology of vastly different styles and scales of things. The collection here shows a speculative design about parts, containers, sets, and also the play of the scale.
Our sole hope lies on the contrary in decentralization. But if by term is meant by dispersal of large centers of population, this must be dismissed as a mere dream. For the imagination, it paints a lovely picture, just as the memory of colonial towns is lovely. But in all that is actually going on about us, there is nothing to be seen which gives us the slightest substance to it. The tendency towards concentration begins. This is by Hughes.
So here we bring in a new set of a kit made from the cities. It actually established a new identities for the cities and the building. The design represented in the model scales could be treated as a toy and hybrid object at the same time. Architecture is not defined by interior and exterior anymore. They can coexist with each other. Geometric interior spec techniques such as nesting, stacking, copying, scaling, and rotating of existing city fabric gives us a speculative realism of the interiority.
Just as Rem Koolhaas described in Small, Medium, Large Excel, designing to what city is today instead of what it was or what it should be. The concept of a city within a building, the building within a city, here we create a dynamic civil life in multiple centralized towers.
Okay, and then we go to the plan. This kind of knowledge plan, the plan matrix section from the towers show a mix of dynamic city topologies. We compared the plan of other cities around the world from the most fundamental elements. It actually creates an imaginary metropolis which contains multi-dimensional cities in one tower. And here we show some of the examples we collect, such as Rome and Venice and London, and also some others to show the scales and the dimension and how it looks from the city perspective. Yeah, I think this is all.
You guys maybe want to go back to some of those model photo, yeah, like those, these, that, something like this.
So this is actually this is a clay model to see actually the building geometry and how we create the space inside and how it become the interior actually become the facade and the exterior become a part of the interior. And also the others just shows the texture, the choice we choose. And here we want to like back. So I think the major difference between the white box as a container or like a box, it actually, the main idea is actually we're trying to mix the idea of the scale and the idea of model, architecture model and the actual buildings. They can actually be one thing at the same time. So here we show the building actually can be a really playful set of collection as the toy.
Say that again. The building can be a playful set of
toy, like yeah, like the Lego city. You can actually make them playful, and the idea, the slicing idea to open the interior, so you see the interior in your glimpse.
Can you go back to the previous one you showed? Yeah, I think it was this where you said that the interior is exposed on the exterior?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So what, each of these steps is at the scale of a floor, I guess, or multiple?
No, not right now. When we are imagining this as a city within a building, we are not going with the concept which we usually see in today's architecture. I think that every it's like a floor, but right now we are seeing on a more of a massing scale, where we are describing the linear. If you see the linear towers as probably the residential ones, and more of that massing or thick masses as maybe probably like civic spaces or commercial spaces.
But there's no scale here.
Yeah, the scale goes to the last slide to show the plan. So we use the plan as a fundamental way to show the scale.
But the model has no scale.
Yeah, the model scale is actually we have it. It's 1 to 1,000, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we go back to that slide, I'm sorry to be so painful here, but if we go back to that slide, closer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. I'm just trying to, if there is a scale, I'm just trying to understand what it is. So is one of those steps, like on the left tower, if I may call it that, on the other left, or the right side rather, the right side? Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the steps on the left side of that building, is that 1 floor or 3 floors?
So if I had to
like just in dimension,
yeah,
not
so this is about if you see this linear tower, which I point at, that's about 75 meters tall.
75 a whole tower?
No, just that linear thing. So when we say city, when we started with, sorry, I'll just jump to this.
So these things are like kilometers high, basically.
Yeah. Yes. So that's what I think is really interesting. So you see it as like really small toy, but it is actually not. You see, the plan will show how how massive they are.
Okay, so now I get the scale, which is quite significant to your story and to the models in understanding them. And if you could please go back to that one that I always want to go back to.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Now now that I understand the scale, I'd like to understand how is the gold, vertical piece. How are the gold vertical pieces? How are those interior elements versus the black vertical stepped elements or angled elements? Like, what constitutes interior being outside? Like, how? Like, those things are massive. So why is that considered to be interior brought to the outside?
So when we are saying that as we describe our project, like city within a building, we are not saying that building would be like, we are tending towards this transformation where we are trying to convert a building is not like an enclosed, like it's an enclosed thing, but that if you're giving a city life, you need to be open to the world. So we cannot be sitting around in like an enclosed wall, but we can feel that we are enclosed. Probably that's where I would differentiate between just having slabs or floors inside a completely closed building, and where we are trying to chamfer it off and then keep open our inside of the city as like a city.
Okay, so I can't say that I completely understand what you mean by that and how that translates like to the formal elements here, the vertical strips that are 75 meters tall. So I can't say that I get it, but I can say that is extremely interesting, or seems extremely interesting and worthy of trying to develop and to more clearly articulate. Like that's thesis, like like an inversion or a whole new conception of space or mass through which we're inhabited. That's a thesis, right? And so, but it's not being, and so you have the stuff that looks like otherworldly, thesis worthy, but you haven't articulated, in my view, you haven't articulated clearly a thesis. It seems like there, right? But it's not articulated.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because you know, we're still trying to develop the story behind this, you know, massive geometry.
Well, I think a lot of it obviously has to do with like conflating of scales, right? Because you're using zoning envelopes or building envelopes, and then you're doing them at an urban scale. But the irony in what I'm seeing here is that you're showing a level of interiority, or like, let's say, articulation that wouldn't be typical of a building, but would be more typical of urban, an urban scale, let's say, city. And so in some ways, if a building was to occur on that scale, that it would have the degree of articulation that you're talking about. So there's something kind of ironic about the fact that that you're using this envelope, but in the end, it's actually quite conventional, because an urban form on that scale would have that same level of articulation. So, sorry, I'm getting far. Sorry.
I think there's a kind of rhetorical dislocation in the way that you presented this project between form and space, and that you're taking up like the Hugh Ferris references, but taking them up very specifically in terms of their formal outcomes. But both the way that those things themselves are represented, which is almost always from street level, and in the context of like the urbanity of Manhattan, and the way that you then describe the implications of this space, such as this like massive civic space. And when you first talked about that, I thought like, whatever, like one floor, 50 floors up, civic space, okay. But then when you say it's like 75 meters tall, then like, that's insane. And like, I wanna understand what that is, and then how that space through experience is affecting the way that I would relate to the city. So I almost wonder if like at the end, all of these analytical diagrams comparing these things to like other urban scales isn't necessarily as important as like getting inside, not literally inside, but like getting into a more spatial understanding of what you've created.
So, so you mean the last of like the slides of the Nolly plan?
I guess I just mean that like there's a certain level of like you're beginning to describe certain implications that these shapes would have on how we understand like a civic space or scale, those kind of things. But we don't necessarily see any sort of representation. It doesn't have to be like a perspective per se, but that's just the first thing I think of that would speak to that scale of experience of that space, which is what I think is so like maybe interesting about the way that you read the Hugh Ferris renderings, which I'd never thought of before, which is that they are spatial in that they're always rendered from a perspective of a human eye on the street. So you borrowed from that a form or like a shape language, but the way that you're representing it now is not necessarily of the world that it came from. It's one that is using it formally speaking, like we're looking at these kind of steps or these cuts, these things. And so for me, like, that's why it's so weird when there's one image where one of the Hugh Ferris things is like on its side. And that just like feels so, like I've just never thought of it like that before. Not a good or a bad thing, just that made me realize that there is a kind of dislocation between the experience of these things and just the form of them. So I'm really curious then what the experience of this would be. And I'm not saying it has to be a perspective, but just that is the usual method of representing that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think I would be cautious of falling too much in love with these images, because they can be golden handcuffs for you, because of the fact that I mean, there is something that's appealing about the abstractness and scalelessness of them. I mean, the only thing that really gives them scale at this is the sense of them being, you know, the size of a zoning envelope or a building, let's say. But for me, there's you know, that idea of a city within within a building envelope, or like the play of scale, that becomes more pronounced the more articulation you have of the elements within the city, right? So within the building, however you want to speak about it. But because right now, the ways that you're describing the various programs within the city, pretty much it has to do mostly with the scale of the elements, and there's not other sort of signifiers of what these different sort of components of the city might be. And I think through developing that further, that will actually create more of a disjunction, like that sort of flipping of scale that you guys seem to be interested in.
Mm.
I think another consideration is to ground your project. This maybe goes for all the projects, or most of them. You know, the consideration of grounding your project in our current reality, right? So like the constructive reality, the political reality, the state of the earth today, you know, and I mean, you can make the choice that that's not what I'm dealing with. You know, I'm not addressing the entire world. This is, let's say, a detached exercise of what could be a fictional world, which is allowing us to explore some particular ideas. But I would argue that where we're going, and I know it's, I'm East Coast, you're West Coast, you know, and I'm Columbia, and, you know, versus SCI-Arc. But it just feels like, in particular, in light of, you know, recent events, whether it's a pandemic or you know, murders, that there is a broader context within which we operate, and you know, the condition of the world and global warming, etc. Like this project can address those things, and those things can be motivators. Those can drive decisions. Those can drive those factors can drive like formal decisions and arrangement and whatnot, and just ground. Even if, let's say, the technology is not there to build a 3-mile-high building, you know, you still are grounding your decisions, which you might be grasping for, like, oh shit, so that 75-meter vertical thing, which is the scale of a decent sized residential building in New York City, in and of itself, you know, like, what is it? You know, put little windows in it, or, you know, like those kind of decisions in developing a project like this may give you a lot of question marks, and you may be lacking in how am I going to articulate these things. But rooting it in our context, our reality, may drive these things, may make this project a lot more relevant than let's say a more abstract, detached exercise.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that 100%. You mentioned, you know, Rem Koolhaas and, you know, his study into skyscrapers and that sort of things, and that's a pretty direct reference here, of course. But I was thinking about his work on, you know, the thickening of the Berlin Wall, and more of like a dystopian type society, and using some of the because this to me feels more dystopian than utopian, right? And so maybe using that narrative to actually draw out some of these contemporary issues, and it could create like a sort of, in the same way that Koolhaas did in I'm forgetting the name of the project, but it's similar to the continuous monument, but it's actually like a thickened area for prisoners. You guys probably studied it.
It's his thesis project, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. It's I can't remember the name of it. It's been
Exodus.
Exodus, thank you. I'm thinking of Exodus, and he uses a narrative in that to structure the, the thesis. And to me, that same sort of strategy could be used here, which would, add a layer of richness to the story, but also tie it into contemporary issues the way that Gordon's suggesting.
Sure. I think it's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one particularity of all of that, which I totally agree with from the jury, is how these things land on another city, right? It's like a new set, a new urban organization landing on an existing city, and with all the political and social realities of what that entails. Does it land like a rocket ship with a kind of a, like a burn zone? Are these things sprouting up from empty areas in the city? What exactly, like what you guys are saying, what is the narrative, or what is the impetus for this thing to happen? And I think the closer you guys get to that, the more really vexing and weird this project will get. Like the more reality you put into it, the more these things will seem like from a different reality, in a good way.
Yep.
Yeah, I had just sort of one, not a meta comment at all, just a kind of an observation about this, which is that, you're definitely, obviously, you've taken the kind of stepping of the Hugh Ferris and then the kind of aesthetic of the sheer. But I actually wonder if looking at the sheer as a way to expose interiors could give you a way of, obviously, I don't know exactly yet how to manage it at the scale, but like Johnson's sheer in Houston, or Hugh Stubbins' sheer in New York, or maybe even more kind of domestic would be, I've been looking for the example, I'll try to find it, but like Hans Hollein has this apartment building outside Vienna where, it's triangulated, and so all of it gives everyone these funky balconies, because when you cut it on that sheer, right, the way to negotiate that angle, or even the Luxor in Las Vegas. I'm just like thinking really practically, like look at how sheers have impacted. And I guess maybe my final one that I was thinking of would be the Thompson Center in Chicago, where the interior atrium is like a drum, but when it comes out of the building, it's sheared. So it's obviously, it's not quite literally, not all the time does it quite literally open up the interiors to the exterior, but the shear has been, I think, a way over time to negotiate how something might present a different part of the building. And that, that might just be, as you're working at multiple scales, that might be something that I think it seems innovative about how this thing grows and how you expose its interior.
Okay, definitely. But can you repeat the name again, because I some of them I just lost.
Yeah, I'll put them in the chat.
All right, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Raymond Abraham, Austrian Cultural Forum.
Fantastic, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I just think the sheer seems like something you guys should take up.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, I don't know if anyone has any closing comments, but it was so fantastic to see all of these alums join us today, and I think all of the students really brought a lot to the table for our first presentation. So I want to thank the students, and I definitely want to thank the enthusiasm and generosity of the critics. And I hope everyone can join us tonight at 6 o'clock, where the students get to listen to our critics a little bit, if I understand, and we might get to understand a little bit about what you all have been doing since you've graduated, which I think will be a treat for most of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Have a wonderful afternoon. I'll see you soon. Okay.
See you.
Bye.